You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to V.A.C. Roundtable number 82. That's right. It's climbing the charts. And with us today is a hero to us. And as we continue our discussions with the people who we greatly respect, this is one that Michael and I have special love for because we have worked with our guest tonight, and her name is Lennice Werth. She is from the wonderful state of Virginia, and she basically has run an organization called Virginians Against Drug Violence. And I've been fortunate to work with her at the state capitol there in Virginia. And that was 25 years ago. And I know Michael's been, working with her for 30 plus years. So it's an honor to have such a dedicated activist. So I want to welcome Lennice Werth. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, that's great. I've been excited about this.
Well, we'll just jump right into it. Our first question is one that is a multi-part question. So it is, of course, how did you originally come to cannabis? Such as when were you originally heard about it? When were you turned on? And then when did you realize it was going to be your life's work? So we have other questions, of course, that follow up on some of that history, but just kind of give us an understanding of why cannabis for Lennice.
All right. Well, that's kind of easy. I'll tell you, the first time I ever had it, first of all, I was a teenager in the 60s. I was born in 1950. So I was literally a teenager all during the 60s. And so how much fun was that? That was great. However, it's never fun being a teenager. It's hard, And I think that the first thing that happened to me with cannabis was that my mother had taken me to the local mental health, run by the government, basically, where they put me in a group therapy. And the other kids in the group therapy, some of them they weren't the best kids at school. You know what I'm saying? They were kind of the bad guys. The boys I would have never found myself in the same room with. And then one time my mother was late picking me up. Well, actually, she forgot to pick me up. So these guys offered me a ride, and they also showed me how to inhale with a tobacco cigarette. And then I think the idea was to see the weird girl get stoned. You know what I'm saying? And so they turned me on to weed there. And they drove me all over Northern Virginia. I'm from Falls Church, Virginia. And finally I started asking, I wanted to go home. And they did. They took me home. I had to ask a few times, but they took me back to my house, and I got out of the car, and I went inside, and my father had been he sold encyclopedias. So we had several different sets of encyclopedias. We had the World Book and the Britannica, and then there was one I think called the Book of Knowledge. I can't remember, but we had multiple. Well, I went to the Britannica, okay, because I knew that was the best one. And I looked up marijuana because I was curious. I've always been kind of intellectually curious, but I looked up marijuana and I read it had all that Anslinger stuff, the whole reefer madness. It was like about 8 column inches of reefer madness. And then at the end of it, it said, see cannabis. So I get out the C book and I look up cannabis, and then I get all this medical stuff that was known this was probably in 1958. It was all known back then. It was in the Encyclopedia Britannica that it had medical use. And then at the bottom of that column, it said see hemp. And I got the H book out and I looked at that, and it had 3 pages of stuff about hemp. I mean, that was much more, that dwarfed the other 2 issues. And I was like, wow, I didn't know all of that, and then I did. So I knew all that in 1958 from the good old Encyclopedia Britannica. But another experience I had, which kind of told me about where we were with the drug war, was that I was invited to a party at a friend's house. And at this party, everybody, they were smoking weed. And every time there was a knock on the door, people were freaking out. Is it the cops? Yeah, right. You're talking about a bunch of teenagers having a party in a house when the parents have gone off for a weekend or something, And so also, if you didn't smoke weed, they would start thinking maybe you were a narc, So you kind of had to smoke weed at this party. And that's what I noticed, that there wasn't really a choice. You sort of had to smoke weed. And why did you have to smoke weed? Because of the cops and the drug laws. So it was not really working the way it was supposed to work. And that's what I took away from that experience, that here's this stuff that's maligned, as in the Anslinger stuff, medically useful, as in the cannabis stuff, and industrial important, as with the hemp stuff, and they have laws against it that aren't working. So, and there was another story. I got to go back to that was all when I was in my early teens. When I was 8 years old, I got a bladder, and they call UTI, urinary tract infection, very painful. And my mother took me to the doctor, and the doctor said, he gave me this lecture, like, when you have to go to the bathroom, little girl, you go to the bathroom right then, don't put it off, And I had been putting it off because you had to raise your hand, and it was embarrassing in class, and you had to get a hall pass. You had to get permission to be in the hall. And so I wound up with a UTI. So anyway, no surprise there. But the doctor gives me this little talk. And then as we're leaving the doctor's office, my mother has a piece of paper in her hand. And I said, what's that? And she said, well, this is so we can get your medicine. And I said to her, you mean it's a permission slip? And she said, yes. And so I started telling people when I was 8 years old that I was against the prescription laws. So that's who was going into the marijuana experiences that the teenager I described had. So it was all like predetermined. I'm sorry, I think God just meant for this to happen, But the way my mind worked, I saw. And then, during the 60s, we had all that anti-war stuff, and I'd been active in the civil rights movement with my mom and our church, in the Unitarian Church of Arlington. And then I thought that we were protesting the war, and as soon as we got the war over, the war in Vietnam, we were going to all go legalize weed. And when that didn't happen, I was a little surprised. I was like the hippies, they all moved out to the country and started living off the land. And it was just some of them became Jesus freaks. It was a whole, scattering of the tribes, and I noticed that. So I had my own little get back to the land thing. Walter, and my first husband, my husband, my dearly beloved and departed husband, I met him when I was 19 years old. And so I was 22. And now this is where the beginning of my medical use and our history. You asked about Walter. And I was 22 at the time. I'd met him when I was 19. We'd been living together. Everything was fine. But one day we kind of had a bad day. And I thought we were going to break up. I thought that this was just the end because we had had such a bad day. But instead, we had been invited to a party. So we decided to go to the party. So we went to the party. And on the way home in the car from the party, my husband, Walter, turned and looked at me. He said, "What did you do at that party?" And I said, "Well, Margie and I went back in her room and we smoked a joint." And he looked at me like, "We're going to get you some marijuana." It was like, it had just like, he liked me a lot better. And it's true that I had figure out what was going on with me medically. And it wasn't, of course, with cannabis stories, it's not just one thing. It was several different things that made it very difficult to understand what was really going on with me. I now think I've got it all figured out. We'll see. But in those days, we just knew that we'd helped a lot. We just knew that. We could see that. We could both see that. And so, like I would get up in the morning and he wanted me to consume cannabis, ATN, before he got up in the morning so that he wouldn't have to face the unmedicated Lennice, I know, really. And so sometimes I didn't. And then he would just pack that little pipe, little glass pipe, and he'd hand it to me. And we would count the numbers. So we did this on a number of occasions, count the number of tokes I would have to take before my mental state completely flipped to one of anger and negativity to one of positivity and joyful and positive. And usually it was about 6 hits. So that's how much of a mess I was. We were not just one hit would do, But and so I looked at him, one time. He said, "You just have to use that stuff." And I said, "Well, it's illegal." "Oh, you have to do something about that." So you asked me, want to know how he was in the military, so he had that pragmatic mind. And, "Oh, well, you just have to do something about it." Well, then I had my marching orders, didn't I? So, from there.
Let's get into that. Of course,
Yeah.
you're kind of leading into it. So Michael has our next question, which is,
All right.
as you stated before, or for our audience, we're going to shift this question, or Lennice is going to shift this question. But let's go. Michael asked the question. We'll get into it further. Councilmember Krawitz, you're recognized.
Thanks, and thanks for joining us, Lennice. This is really a pleasure. Really happy you were able to take the time to sit on one of our roundtables. This is part of our internal discussions that we face outwards with the Veterans Action Council, and it's pretty special for us. Before I go into the question, actually, I wanted to just take a sidebar and comment on what you had said. You had said that the scattering of the tribes, I think was the word that you used, for the very late 60s. And this is something that lines up with an internal discussion we had in one of our meetings just the other day, where I was sort of exploring the history of the cannabis movement and lamenting the fact that, we had sort of 3 components of the movement in 1968. One of them was a large social movement. One was a grass tops movement, and one was a grassroots movement. We still have a grass tops and a grassroots movement, but we lost the social movement. And that was virtually every college campus. It was everywhere. And it's hard to describe now to folks that are on social media what it felt like to have the energy of bodies on the street, and bodies on the park grounds, and just the intense energy of the love and camaraderie and experimentation and knowledge collecting of something that we call the pursuit of evidence, but it's really a quest for truth. And once you learn what truth is, you become very, very highly addicted to it and want to find it and live it. So anyway, much love for you and for the past and for the social movement that was. But anyway, the question you are coming at this with a very different perspective, and I love that we can explore that perspective. But we wanted to start this first question grounding you a little bit in our world as veterans, because it strikes me that you could engage cannabis activism without the veterans experience, and the veterans are still there. We're stakeholders. We're recipients of medical cannabis often, and we're also activists. I mean, I've yet to see a single social movement that doesn't have veterans near the front of the line in taking some sort of active role, putting rolling up their sleeves and doing these things. Seems to be in our DNA to be activists as veterans, but rarely and quite special is when we actually can use our knowledge that we gained in the military and actually apply that to our craft as activists. And I think you did that actually quite well. And the question is, however you want to take it, but how did the military experience of your loved ones, and it's, certainly I remember your first husband, Walt, who passed away. He's just a wonderful man and an amazing activist behind the scenes.
Walter is the one who set me to the activism, as I just described. But I wanted to talk about my great uncle, Charlie Fair. Charlie Fair was a veteran, I believe, I'm not certain, the Spanish-American War. He was totally, I never knew this man because he had I think he either had a badly damaged leg or an amputated leg. And I have to tell you, I'm not even sure which one it is. This was something my mother could not talk about, but I got it from other relatives, and I had to piece this together, what happened. But back in those days, not everybody had running water in their house. And even though my mother's household was a upper middle class household, her father was a lawyer and a judge, they had an outhouse, and Uncle Charlie would go in the outhouse and use morphine. He was in pain and he used morphine. And this is actually, so the Harrison Act had been passed. This would have happened in the 30s. But so the Harrison Act was already there, but they were starting to enforce it more and more. They gradually enforced it more and more. So Uncle Charlie's physician, who would sometimes, he would give him morphine. And I believe, I'm not certain about this, but in those days, a lot of times the doctors would actually use with a patient. There are cases like that. And I don't know what the situation was. I wasn't there, but Uncle Charlie's doctor was arrested and imprisoned for prescribing morphine in what was inappropriate. All of a sudden, before it had been legal, now it's not anymore. And Uncle Charlie's access to morphine was ceased to exist. And Uncle Charlie committed suicide in a horrible way. And this just ruined my mother. She thought she was a little girl, and she thought it was her fault. She thought it was her fault because she had put a note up in the outhouse saying, "Please don't make a mess in here." And that was, that she was sure that it was because of that Uncle Charlie ended his own life. And that so damaged her that I could never talk to her about drugs. She really got into a place where she just couldn't deal with it. And the trauma was so apparent to me because I did try to talk to her about drugs that, it took me a long time to figure out. But this was what happened as a result of my Uncle Charlie's military service. Now, my first husband had had a kind of a nice military experience. He had he never he did his whole service in Washington, D.C. He was the personnel sergeant for an intelligence unit in Washington, D.C. And it was interesting. He learned a lot. And when us all over Washington, D.C., Walter was running the war room. They actually had a table set up with cops and hippies and were moving them around like you see with like the Battle of Waterloo, you know? And so it was just kind of crazy that that was what he was doing during those times. But yeah, but he knew he had that. He knew when, you know, when he saw what cannabis did for me, he knew that we had to get it legalized. And he just, like I said, he gave me my marching orders. And so he was just a very logical thinker, which I think is what happens when people serve in the military. They're forced to be logical. You can't be poetic about it. You have to say what you mean and mean what you say. And he told me I had to get weed legalized.
Well,
So,
you followed through.
yeah. Now my current husband, I met him at a party where pot was being used, and back and you know, I had been widowed, and this is another pertinent thing. I'd been widowed, and a lot of people. I was looking for another guy. You know, what can I say? You know, Walter was gone, who was the love of my life, but I was looking for somebody to hang out with and have fun with. And most of these guys, you know, that were in my age group, my activism made them nervous. But when I met this guy, he was actually bragging to his family that he had an activist girlfriend. He liked it. And he, you know, so there you go.
Michael has a follow-up.
Yeah, so I just have I guess one question that you could focus on just to give a taste of the, you know, the strategy involved. But explain the strategy behind the name Virginians Against Drug Violence.
Oh, we worked really hard on that. Walter was, you know, insisting that we have a good name to go down to the state legislature and lobby under. You know, first of all, we had decided, my girlfriend and I had gotten together and we decided that we were the Little Sisters of the Mother Herb, you know, and Little Sisters of the Mother Herb was a loose organization. We consider all women who are activists for cannabis to be Little Sisters of the Mother Herb. At the time, there was on the West Coast, there were the Holy Hemp Sisters. So we considered ourselves the East Coast Holy Hemp Sisters. So yeah, so there was that. But obviously, you wouldn't want to be going into a senator's office and saying, "Hey, we're the Little Sisters of the Mother Herb." That wasn't going to work. So we sat around the kitchen table for hours and hours playing with things, and we just wanted to. Basically, the Virginians Against Drug Violence was designed to get the response that we usually did get. Well, what do you mean? How are you against drug violence? And the answer would be, well, you know why there's violence in the drug market, don't you? And no, well, because of prohibition, because the laws against it, you know, the legal dealing, the regulated dealing is illegal. They can't do that. They have to do black market things and illegal things, and that's where the violence comes in. And at the time we did this, we were doing it in Richmond, Virginia, and Richmond was actually the murder capital of the United States in the late 80s and early 90s when we were doing this. And so it worked.
Right on. Well, that's quite a journey, sister, to say the least, but let's continue that journey. Council member Michael Davis has a follow-up has the next question, not a follow-up. There we go. Michael.
Yeah, you were just talking about the Little Sisters of the Good Herb. Could you just explain a little bit more, just expound a little bit more on their role and the impact on the cannabis movement?
Well, the Little Sisters of the Mother Herb didn't have a huge impact on the cannabis movement. The Holy Hemp Sisters probably had more, you know, because we decided right away that that was something that was spiritual. and that we were going to not do as a membership organization, that it was just kind of who we were, the little sisters of the mother herb. The good herb to good mothers are good. But we considered cannabis to be the mother herb. And I used to ride on a bus in Washington, D.C. that went past the Little Sisters of the Poor convent. And so that probably influenced me. But like I said, it was more of a spiritual thing, being a little sister of the mother herb. But so we had to have the practical organization. So what we did was we bought a copy of The Emperor Wears No Clothes. Now, like I said, this was probably in 1989 when the book was just coming out. When was it published? Was it published in 88 or 89, right? Anyway, we got a copy of that book and we read it with great enthusiasm and, in tattered corners of pages and all. And then we went to the back of that book, and there were several organizations that said they were kind of recruiting, And we sent Jack Hare, he had Help End Marijuana Prohibition, Hemp. And then there was the Business Alliance for Commerce and Hemp, and that was Chris Conrad. So we wrote letters to 3 or 4 of these organizations, and the only one that got back to us was Chris Conrad. And so we became the Virginian Business Alliance for Commerce and Hemp. And this was a strategy at the time when marijuana legalization was still pretty far out there. And so we decided to use the strategy of introducing commercial hemp into the conversation. And so that's what we did. We had great success when we went to county fairs and the state fair, but the biggest success there was when we went to the Chesterfield County Fair, and Chesterfield had a very aggressive anti-marijuana and anti-drug DARE program. And the DARE cop came and basically shut our little booth down at the Chesterfield County Fair. He said we couldn't show that because we couldn't say good things about marijuana. So I called the ACLU guy, and the ACLU guy thought about it for a couple of days and asked a million questions. And finally he said, well, I think we could take this case. And it actually got in really fast to the federal court in Richmond because the fair was ongoing and they considered it an emergency. We had to get our exhibit reinstated. And so within a week, we were in federal court and we won. And the ACLU got paid. And there was a big article in the newspaper, which got us like 100,000 times more publicity than our little exhibit. We didn't even bother to go back to the Chesterfield County Fair. We just, rode that wave of publicity for a while. It was great. So but the Business Alliance and Commerce and Hemp was the one who did that. And that was at the same time. So we were Little Sisters of the Mother Herb unofficially, and officially the Business Alliance of Commerce and Hemp. And then at some point I told Chris Conrad years after that, I said, geez, we're going to just kind of move on. And that's when we became Virginians Against Drug Violence. And Chris was a little disappointed, but I had to tell him, it was time to get to the real issue, which was not non-intoxicating hemp, So we went on to intoxicating hemp.
All right. Yeah, it was. Let's get on to Councilmember Freeze.
I have to say, this is all amazing to hear this history. It's quite a footprint you've had. My question is, what can you tell us about, well, you've kind of already gone into this, but what can you tell us about the Virginia chapter of the Business Alliance for Cannabis and Hemp in its effort to advance cannabis and hemp-related businesses in the state, as well as the hemp case in the U.S. Court of Appeals?
Right. Well, I'm not so sure. What we did was we did that exhibit. We took our exhibit around to the county fairs and the state fairs, and in the courtroom when that federal judge, his name was Payne, and I brought in some hemp paper, and I handed that to the judge. And he was very interested and impressed, and we had samples of hemp paper and hemp cloth and all of the things that you could do with hemp, and books about it. You know, Chris Conrad had written a book about the future of hemp and all of its commercial uses. And so we had all this information, and we were just trying to proselytize. We were telling people, no, you know, this plant has more uses than you know about. And that was our message, and we got it out there. And by the time we were done, we succeeded in that, as you know. And then later on, a strictly hemp organization that's still in existence now, the Virginia. Hey, Mike, say the name of that, Jason Armatucci's, because he changed the name of it.
Yeah, the Virginia Cannabis Coalition.
Yeah, but he was
the Virginia Hemp Association, I guess.
Yeah, the Virginia Hemp Association. So that has, you know, somebody else took that over and is doing it now and doing a great job and making sure that farmers' interests are being represented at the state level here in Virginia. And so we did, but I thought we were pretty darn successful at the time, way back when, in the early 90s, getting the issue of hemp out there. People were ready to hear that.
They were. And
Yeah.
Those Hemp Lifeline to the Future, definitely from Chris Conrad, was definitely one that elevated things for sure.
And that's the book. I'll tell you what. The cop took that book off of our table in our exhibit in Chesterfield County, and he put bookmarks in it, and I still have that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, because you know, Jack's book was a compendium, right?
Oh yeah.
We
yeah.
used that, or for people who aren't aware, in the day, because it was Jack's book was the exact 8.5 by 11. So we literally would just put his pages on copiers and use those pages at rallies and information. Whereas Chris Conrad took Jack's book and made it into an actual book, which Jack's is more of a reference and it reads better later, but the earlier on was more of a compendium.
To me, it was like what you'd call a graphic novel almost.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
Are you looking to get your medical cannabis grow license? Limestone City Hydroponics can help patients through the process of obtaining their license to grow medical cannabis. What's that? You don't have a doctor. If you meet the medical criteria, Limestone City Hydroponics has a nurse practitioner who can assess and provide medical cannabis prescriptions. What are you waiting for? Contact Limestone City Hydroponics at limestonecityhydroponics.ca or call them at 613-548-0420.
What do you find at paceradio.net? People advocating cannabis education.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Rerolled Saturdays. Check it out. Nothing but non-stop cannabis and psychedelic programming. Find it at 420pace.ca.
Cannabis edibles are an effective way to manage pain and other ailments, especially when you deal with your trusted partner, Legacy 420, in Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. You see, we lab test every product on site to ensure proper dosage every time, which is critical when consuming cannabis edibles. All Legacy 420 edibles are made by our classically trained baker and chocolatier, and we also have super tasty vegan options.
Our baker has been in the industry for 25 years. She's also a chocolatier. Everything from savory to sweet, your chocolate bars, brownies, butter tarts, you name it, we make it.
Talk to our knowledgeable Cannatex about our incredible variety available. Give your trusted partners a call. Legacy 420 out on your road.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
Correct. Yeah.
You know, it had so many illustrations, and it was just packed with stuff.
Absolutely.
And you know, Jack's book changed the world. You know.
Yeah, he came to my university in 1989, and if he hadn't, you know, I have no idea where I would be if I hadn't have gotten my copy, my old white, you know, copy of The Emperor Wears No Clothes. But
exactly.
On to our next question, which I will be asking. So, as a lifelong Virginian, how has your connection to the state shaped your approach to activism, your perspective on drug policy reform, and what it was like to work with Virginia politicians?
Oh boy. Okay, that's kind of two questions. And the first one was, how did Virginia shape me? And the second one is what did I have to do to deal with Virginia politicians? Okay, so how did Virginia shape me? Okay, so I've always lived in Virginia. I grew up in Falls Church, but I also lived what we call inside the Beltway. You know, I lived close to Washington, D.C. I used to get on a bus and go into, you know, to the Smithsonian, go, you know, all those wonderful places on the mall. I used to go to the zoo, and I mean, I used to go to Capitol Hill and just hang out because that was so cool to me that I could just do that. And in those days, it was a lot more open. So I knew about Washington, D.C. And so when I wanted to get weed legal, and Mike's heard me tell this story so many times, so get ready, Mike. But, you know, I wanted to get weed legal. And so I went to see my local politician, you know, and the delegate to the Virginia House of Delegates. And I talked to that guy about cannabis, and he was totally uninterested. His name was Parker at the time. He owned a oil and gas company, so he was in fossil fuels anyway. So, but he was a bit hostile. But what he told me was, he said, well, that's not something we can do. That's federal law. And so I went to see my congressman, and there again at that time, this was not somebody who was interested at all, and was probably a little bit hostile, but still, this guy told me that the feds really couldn't do anything about that because it was international law. So I knew right away. And then I tried. I packed a briefcase up. I said, well, I've hung out on the Capitol a lot. I'm not scared of the Capitol. I put some stuff in a briefcase, Mike, the circle chart, you know, and I went up to Washington, D.C., and I tried to talk to my Congress critters, and it was daunting. I realized that you really, you know, let me just put it, I'm no Rob Campia, I'm no Howard Wooldridge. You know, these people who are able to take on the federal legislators and really do well with them. I just wasn't there. So I said, you know, well, maybe I can just do Virginia because that's home. And the state laws are the most important. It's what you get prosecuted under is generally state laws. So I started going to the state meetings, the crime commission meetings, and I just dove in, and I learned the ropes. it was before the internet was really, it was before they had everything really digitalized. So I remember the first few sessions I covered, I had to call them and ask them for the book with all the proposed laws in it, and they had to mail it to me. And by the time I got the book in the mail, some of the laws had already been considered, and passed on to the next, house. I usually could catch it before it went through the whole legislative process, but I missed half the process just because they had to mail me the book. So, it was great when now that's all online and you can see everything that's going on, and you can even go to the meetings virtually. But I decided I was just going to be there. Well, what really happened in Virginia, and I'd be amiss if I didn't mention this, was in 1990, they passed what we called the smoke a joint, lose your license law. And I heard about it and I was like, well, where was I for that? And then that's when I realized I had to go to these state meetings. I just couldn't pass. I'd been going around the state with the hemp exhibit and this had happened. And I felt that it had happened on my watch and that I hadn't done my job. And that was an awful law. It was the worst thing that happened to you. You lost your driver's license when you got busted for possession for years and years. And so that was an awful thing. And I wasn't going to let that happen again. And we didn't let that happen. Nothing really, once I dove in and started, they did do that seeds and stems thing. It took them 6 years, but that didn't have as big an effect, And then after seeds and stems, they stopped getting bills through, period, that were anti-marijuana. So, I just learned, on my own and I got her done. But I really regretted not being there for the smoke a joint, lose your license thing. But now, okay, so that was Virginia. So Virginia politicians, well, I rubbed their noses in the smoke a joint, lose your license, and anything else that they were, that they were trying to do that was
hold on. How did you rub their nose in it? Explain it to the people so they can understand how it was done.
Okay, well, I would, first of all, I would talk to people, when I met people out and about, and I met a young man who had gotten busted for possession, a small amount, just like not even a whole joint, and then, they took his license away and he couldn't go to work and support his family anymore. And that's exactly how I rubbed the noses in it. It wasn't that hard, was it? Here's a young man and all he had was a roach, and you're making it his whole family suffer. A shame on you. I didn't say that, but it was pretty well and easy to imply that. And yeah.
Did you do this in person, via letters, letter writing campaigns? How did you do this?
I like to do that sort of thing in person. I would always write letters, but the letters were less rub your nose in it sort of thing. Other than making logical points, I would make the same logical point in a letter, but I could be a little bit more aggressive, and I'm not an aggressive person. I'm just a kind of like a talkative, people might think I'm lightweight, and I probably am not. I'm not I love particle physics, but that doesn't make me heavy, So anyway, I just, every politician's got their own personality, and you handle different personalities differently. And I just size people up and do the best I could.
All right, I got a follow-up question, because you worked so hard on this. When it finally became legal in Virginia, how did you celebrate?
Well, first of all, I just couldn't have been happier. Oh my God. And plus we got grow your own. We can grow 4 plants, which, so last year I did my first legal crop and I had a 10-foot tall plant. How did I celebrate? But I didn't. What we did to celebrate was we had a seed giveaway. And that was a blast. Mike, was that a blast or what? So we caused a big traffic jam. And because people were,
Well,
coming
hold
to
on.
get
Tell
seeds.
people how that happened and what happened, because the viewers don't understand what
Oh, okay.
transpired. So tell them y'all decided on a seed exchange. So where and why was that a seed exchange, and why was that important?
Well, because there wasn't any legal way to get seeds before that, and that that was the big thing. Everybody wanted seeds, so we saw that as filling a need, and I think it was filling a need, and because people really showed up, and what we did was the DC group, the people who got weed legalized in DC, that group, they we had somebody we met in the middle of the Key Bridge on midnight of the night of the day it was legalized. So at the stroke of midnight, the DC guy handed the Virginia guy a bag of seeds in the middle of Key Bridge, which is, if you know DC geography, the Potomac River is the border between DC and Virginia. So it was symbolically beautiful and also kind of practical. And so then they were distributed to, I think, about 4 or 5 different locations. I was here in Charlottesville at 5 different spots in Virginia, and I can only speak to the one in Charlottesville, but it was at a private home, and we were doing it strictly according to the law, because that business about being at a private home was kind of like part of the law. You're not supposed to, you can give cannabis away in your home to a friend. That's the way the law is. It's not supposed, there's nothing commercial about it. And so that's what we did. There was a guy who was willing to have it at his house. And like I said, there was a big traffic jam, and there was even a cop got stuck in our traffic jam, but that went down okay because Mike Crowitz was handling the traffic jam. So it was just a lot of fun, just a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, because you worked so hard. And of course, it isn't surprising that once it's legal, you're doing an activist action out the gate to propagate the new law.
Yeah. Well, I'm still pinching myself because I can remember way back in the 90s telling people, I'm in Virginia, and I always identify myself as Lennice from Virginia. Even when the Drug Policy Alliance gave me an award, they thought my name was Virginia. But anyway, I always identified myself as being from Virginia, and I said I would go to the Drug Policy Alliance meetings and say, I'm in Virginia, and we're working on cannabis legalization, and Virginia, that's never going to happen. And I don't know how many people I said this to, but my common reply to that, we're going to be the first state in the South to legalize. And of course, everybody thought that was ridiculous because Virginia had a reputation for being a very conservative state. Now that we've blown that to hell, we're actually blue now, but that was kind of like a joke. But we really did wind up being the first Southern state to legalize.
And it makes me very proud because when I lived in Falls Church, Virginia, I lobbied with you back 97 in Virginia, because there was a law on the books. I guess it's moot now, that once marijuana was moved out of Schedule 1 in Virginia, it would be medically legal, which was, we were making legislators and those aware of that. Not really. They
didn't know about it, did they? But that law was so limited; it was only covered glaucoma and cancer,
correct.
But it was there, and it was important. And when they tried to repeal it, we made headlines stopping them from repealing it. So yeah, and that's actually what the Drug Policy Alliance gave me an award for.
Well, your leadership and your tenacity, of course, I'm glad you're able to celebrate and rest now a little bit, because damn, you earned that. Michael Crowitz has our next question. Council member.
Thank you, Dean. I really I really enjoy this sort of trip down memory lane. I want to add two details to the story about the seed giveaway. One, to illustrate a little bit, the 5 locations were all over the state, all the way as far as the very southern end of the state, Richmond, and then northern Virginia, right almost inside the Beltway, as well as Charlottesville, and it just was a phenomenally successful thing. We handed out, if I remember correctly, tens of thousands of seeds. It was no small thing. And the handoff at midnight of the night where our law was implemented, where it would be legal on both ends of the Key Bridge, we did that very symbolically and pushed the envelope on that. It's a little risky, as far as activism goes. We invited the press, but we also invited the DEA and the feds to come arrest us. We would be handing off illegal drugs across the bridge and crossing state lines in violation of federal law. Come arrest us. And I actually half expected a whole bunch of lights to kick on just as we did it, with the press catching a phenomenal photo op of people getting arrested for federal crimes of marijuana at midnight. It's such a great planned photo op, but it never happened. It was quite cool. The media was very just completely enthralled and covered it very, very well. So it was a lot of fun. But I want to, we're at this sort of crossroads, and a lot of people are coming into this cannabis movement now as a starting point. And it is, I think, a starting point in so many ways, for adult recreational access, and how do we really effectively get cannabis, a long-standing traditional medicine, a plant medicine, a herbal medicine. How do we integrate that into this single molecule FDA world? All these questions that we're trying to grapple as we move forward. But I just want to take a moment and just thank you for the work that you've done. It's so unheralded. I guarantee you, everybody, that you would not have legalization had you not stopped the bad stuff. And you're talking about some bills that were like death penalty for a certain amount of marijuana, taking away your guns, even if they were legal because you use marijuana, on and on and on. And it just is a scathing, just litany of bad ideas that came out of the legislature. We started out, I believe, at the Boggs Act in Virginia with all cannabis use being a felony. And our mentor back in like 1971, Roy Scherer, with Virginians for the Sane Marijuana Laws, later renamed Virginians for Sensible Marijuana Laws, and then finally Virginia for the Study of Marijuana Laws. But the Virginians, when they started out, I remember the story that Roy said, he convinced them that you didn't want to have all marijuana be a felony because that would just push the kids to the harder stuff. He sort of turned around their fears against them, because they were so scared of marijuana that certainly the hard stuff must be scary. Of course, we know that the hard stuff is just extracts and things that you just smoke less of. But they didn't know that, and they got really scared of that. And actually, that was the first, crack in their armor. And then, your work to stop these bad bills from happening, it's just unbelievable how hard it would have been to start out now if we hadn't had that stuff knocked down. If any of that had become a status quo, my God. But the question actually, starting now, looking forward, two questions in one, sort of, how do you envision this, moving forward? We've talked a lot. There's a lot of little nuances about legalization that have come up and stuff like that. So feel free to just talk a little bit about what would be like the perfect way to handle cannabis, once we knock down these walls and stuff. What's in your vision? And then the second part of the question was, what kind of little tidbits can you pass on to those that are starting out now, grassroots, in the 21st century?
Well, it's a whole different scene now, isn't it? I mean, something that kind of, I think it maybe limits me a little bit at this point, because I've never been interested. This has always been a civil liberties issue to me. The business of cannabis has not. I always, like back when it was worth its weight in gold, as we can all remember. It was it was ridiculous. It's a plant. It's not that hard to grow. I learned to grow it, and it's it was just a damn shame that there wasn't any access, and that was the problem, having access to this plant. But now that we can all grow what's probably sort of enough for us, the 4 plants is a limit I can live with for now. But going forward, what I'm interested in is not, I don't have a problem with, there's big corporations, they're going to be here. I don't think I can stop that. And I'm not so sure I'm interested, but I am interested in keeping it open to the little guy, so that there can be mom and pop cannabis businesses. That's not going to come free. That's where the struggle is right now in Virginia anyway, and probably all over the country, because the big corporations are hugely interested in the profits they can make. And so they want to shut us out, shut little, I'm a hybridizer, so I'll be offering, now I'm hybridizing this year for the first time legally. And although I did it for many years before it was illegal, but I'm never going to be a big business. I'm going to have a couple of strains maybe that I'm offering to people, and it's never going to be a big business. So keep that open to the little guy. Make sure that there are opportunities and licenses that don't cost too much for mom and pop and little people who are just doing very small operations. So that's one of my big concerns right now.
Well, thank you for taking the time with us tonight. It was an absolute honor to share this space with you and have this discussion. You are an unsung hero to us, and know that, to have worked alongside you and under your guidance there in Virginia, it has been an honor, and it absolutely warmed my heart when it became, I'm a native Louisiana from Louisiana, so I knew it was never going to happen in my lifetime.
Hey, look, there's hope. There's hope.
Oh, there's hope. But
yeah,
you see what the hope that is currently residing there is why I currently reside in California. But
right.
Your leadership and the hard work that you put into Virginia helped change history forever. And we're forever, of course, indebted to you and your hard work and dedication. All those long drives that nobody thanks you for, stopping and getting gas and, in the rain and all that fun stuff. That's, the realities that come with, sometimes you don't get to realize that success. So I'm glad someone as valuable to the movement has been able to soak in it.
Well, listen, I think you're just projecting a little bit here, ATN, because I can remember you guys coming into Richmond in that van, and you guys were living out of that van, you and Debbie and the whole Cannabis Action Network crew. You guys were an inspiration to me. So I think we all had fun. I think there's a spiritual connection between all of us, and it's a huge part of my life. I don't need to be a sung hero. I've always kind of avoided that, but because I just don't, I think that cannabis is the star of this show. And so, but boy, you guys, like I said, you did inspire me. The Cannabis Action Network was the coolest thing going.
Well, we were, again, we were kids, but you stayed and did it. We kept and moved on. And that's what inspires us, is those that stayed, applied the change, and put in the hard work. And a lot of states do not have this luxury that you get to. People died along the way. I mean, Jack's no longer with us, and he didn't get to see the reality. He wouldn't be happy, don't get me wrong, but the changes, it took decades of hard work and dedication. So I just want the viewers to know that, putting in the hard time, the hard work, even though 30 years ago they said it would never happen in your lifetime, Lennice, Now you're now not a closet grower anymore. It's out
No,
and it's legal.
no, I wish Walter had lived to see it. That's a kind of a regret. And now Roy did live to see it. He was predated me as an activist in Virginia. And the last couple of decades of his life, though, Mike, he did lobby under the Virginians Against Drug Violence moniker. So, but he passed away last year, and he lived to see legal. In fact, last time I saw him, I drove down to Petersburg to give him some seeds.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, Lennice, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom and your knowledge. Do you have anything else that you would like to share? Do you have anything that's coming up? Anything you'd like to promote or share with everybody?
The next thing that I'm going to be working on is the gubernatorial candidate, because right now cannabis is frozen in time in Virginia because we have a Republican governor that doesn't want to do anything about it. So I'm going to be working for Abigail Spanberger is going to be running for the governor of Virginia, and she's hemp friendly. And so we're going to work on her campaign. So going forward, yes, there's always something to do.
Absolutely. And good to know that you're still in it to win it.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's been an honor. So I would like to thank our council members, Michael Krawitz, Mike Davis, Leslie Fries, myself, Etienne Fontaine, and of course, our very special guest, Lennice Werth, tonight, for joining us on our V.A.C. Roundtable number 82. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
The Veterans Action Council is a Pace Radio Network content provider.
You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
When you have a pain that's reached its peak, Legacy for 20, it's so unique. If organic cannabis is what you seek, here's your trusted partner 7 days a week. Suppository salves, vapes and drops, topicals, edibles, infused pop. Just when life seems like it ain't easy, at Legacy 420, enjoy a pop freezy. Lab tested products, make them the GOAT. Legacy 420 out on your road. Legacy 420 in Tyndonega Mohawk territory. Indigenous organic cannabis at its finest.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at Pace Radio.